A few years ago, I was working on a really challenging project. The team was going through a lot of transition. So they had new leadership come in. The new leadership decided to implement a new tech stack. And with it came a lot of new processes that the team hadn't really worked with before. And they also had this project was on a super tight deadline. And it was a lot of work, a lot of really deadline based work that was a little bit new to them as far as something of this scale. So my role was to work with them and help them get through these challenges. So when I came in, for me, my mindset was to balance the fact that the team was already undergoing a lot of change with the fact that they didn't have a lot of the structure of any of the agile frameworks before. They had done stand-ups and things like that, but really not a lot of the structure. So for me, it was okay if I come in day one and we go, full blown textbook Scrum guide. That's going to be way too much for a team that's already going through a lot. So, what I did is over the course of several months, I just gradually started adding more and more, whether that was getting into more complicated cadence, all kinds of things. So I really was trying for a while there to keep it really focused on what we needed to be as productive as possible without overwhelming the team. And like I said, we were still doing pretty much everything, just in a more consolidated way. So after a few months of this workflow, and the more gradual implementation of these of this framework, um, so a couple questions started coming in. So the first one was, why aren't you running a scrum of scrums? And we had a pretty good sized team. I think we are around 20 people or so, at the highest point. And my answer was, well, our stand-ups right now are 15 minutes. So I just didn't feel like we would be solving any problems by making the team leads who are already under a lot of pressure, making them attend additional meetings when they already said, "Hey, I don't have enough time to do my work as it is." So that was my thought. There just wasn't a problem with the existing way of doing it. And again, I know people have different thoughts on that, but that was mine. And then another thought came in from one of our other folks, and he said, "Well, I've noticed that you're not following Scrum according to the Scrum guide. And you're not doing retrospectives every sprint, and you're you know not allowing the team to be a little bit more flexible in the stand up and." These kinds of things. And he said, well, how is the project going to be successful if you're not following the Scrum guide? Exactly. And I was, really surprised. And I respect people's opinions. I know there are, I read a lot of forums and things like that, and there certainly is a good number of people who feel that way. For me, Agile is any of the frameworks, and even Scrum allows for this. Is about adapting any framework to work best for the team. And for me, I felt like kind of what I was being asked about and questioned on was a much more rigid approach than what the nature of the agile mindset and even the Scrum Alliance calls for. And it just felt like it was a big step backwards. Here we are, we want to say, in the organization, we want to say, yeah, we're agile, we're agile, we're agile. But then we want to say, oh, but you can't, fold one meeting into another. You have to do it exactly the way it is in the Scrum Guide. And that just felt very counterintuitive to me. So I want to just kind of quickly step through, kind of what the baseline is, where some of the bloat comes in, and then kind of for me, what the guiding principle in all of this is as far as like how I would approach it and how I do approach it. So, for the baseline, you have your sprint planning, and there's tons of different ways to do this. For me personally, I kind of try to do like pre-sprint planning and kind of have it where it's queued up. In an ideal world, you have a product owner and they have everything queued up and ready to go for you. I can't remember the last project I worked where that was the case. So it's been like at minimum a shared responsibility, and in some cases I'm having to do a fair amount of that work myself. So that's kind of how I've managed the sprint planning. There are others that do it 4-hour sprint planning session where you're doing like backlog refinement, and you're doing sprint review, you're doing all those things. Everybody has a different way, but at its core, sprint planning is a pretty key function to set up. Hey, what are we doing this sprint? What is our goal? How long it's going to be and what's going to be worked on. And then you get into your daily scrum or your stand up. Again, these are pretty standard. Hopefully a fairly short meeting. What have you done in the last 24 hours? What are you going to do in the next 24 hours? And are there any blockers? And for me, I try to keep those, short and sweet. I know there's a lot of debate on, hey, we don't want it to be a status meeting, want it to be focused on the blockers. If there aren't blockers, for me, there's still value in people being aware of what's going on. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it where we have a meeting and somebody says, hey, I'm working on this. And then somebody else says, oh, I didn't know you were working on that. I'm working on it too. And so, yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, there's more collaboration, and that doesn't happen, but sometimes things slip through the cracks. And so for me, there's always value in hearing that. Even if people are multitasking during those meetings, which sometimes happens when you're doing them remotely. Sprint review and demo. So, where you have work to demo, and most sprints you should, you kind of, demo that work. Like I said, some fold this into sprint planning. And that's kind of depends. And then sprint retrospective. So kind of focusing on, okay, what in our process can be changed and improved as a team. So bring the team together, kind of discuss those things and figure out, kind of where to go from there. And then on top of this, right, so we have all these ceremonies that the Scrum guide calls for and that are pretty standard, in most workflows. And then we have like all these other, if you want to call them ceremonies, meetings, whatever it is. So, the team is meeting with the designers. They're meeting. There's planning meetings. So like internally, you're going to have your meetings about architecture, how to approach features, things like that. You're going to have backlog refinement. Now, again, if you have a strong product function in your project, then this becomes a lot easier. As I said, in a lot of my projects, it's backlog refinement where, there is a heavy team involvement, as, I would say significant team involvement in that activity. So that's another one it's been pretty time consuming. And then pre-sprint planning. So I was alluding to this a little bit. So for me, rather than having like the 4-hour sprint plannings, I do a pre-sprint planning with the smaller teams in the project, so that we come into that sprint planning and we kind of have a sense of what it's going to look like. And those meetings can be 30 minutes. It just depends on where the project is and where the backlog is. And that kind of dictates how long those meetings are. And then in a lot of the projects I've worked on, there's also meetings where you have to work with the team to get estimates. So a new feature comes in, leadership says, hey, can you tell us how long this is going to take? Got to work with the team to figure that out. And, it can be done a number of different ways. Some of the teams I work with, they like to get together in a call, talk it through, and make sure everybody's aligned, which I think is a very good approach. And others can just do it all, asynchronously. But that depends on the team. So, this doesn't include like you're with your functional manager, you're meeting one-on-one. So all this to say is there's a lot going on, right? And I think for me, when I look at all this, and in the project I mentioned, the team was just being pulled in a lot of different directions. And we have people in meetings 20, 25 hours a week, with all these, things. And then, like I said, on top of the functional management kind of stuff as well. So, the point here is that if we want to say that we're agile and this is an agile framework, then we have to be willing to adapt and do what works for the team. So, rather than have a 4-hour sprint planning meeting, do a 30-minute pre-sprint planning meeting with each team, and then make sprint planning shorter for everyone. So instead of going to 4 hours, everybody's committed to it. Let's say your sprint planning is now 60 minutes and your pre-sprint planning is now 30 minutes. That's 90 minutes instead of 4 hours or 2 hours, whatever it was. So that saves the team time. That's more time that they can be productive. Sprint review. Let's say that you don't have, let's say there was like a lot of R&D work that was done in that sprint. Is it valuable to bring the team together and, have like a demo session? Well, there's not really that much to demo in that case, right? So probably not. But could you maybe at the beginning of sprint planning just open that up for discussion? Say, hey, what did you learn in this? What did you learn in that? And just open up a quick discussion and fold that into sprint planning. I kind of alluded to this a little bit too with the sprint retrospective, is if you have a situation where, the team brought up a bunch of concerns, the concerns aren't things that you could address in your role or your, whatever that might look like. And they had to be run up through a leadership chain. Well, and you don't have answers yet. Is there value in having that meeting again when you can't, the same things are going to come up and you don't have answers? For me, there's probably not. And for me personally, I am someone who's very deeply involved with the teams that I work with. So I try not to let things get to a retrospective where it's like, hey, if something's not working, just tell me right away, and I'll work with you, and we'll try to fix it together. So that's another one where, yes, in an ideal world, we can follow all these things precisely, but we have to be flexible enough to see what's working for the team. And like I said, what would it be valuable for the team? And we come to our guiding principle here. Is it valuable to the team to spend 4 hours in sprint planning when that can be 90 minutes and they can get, 2.5 hours back of their time to be productive? Is a retrospective valuable if you don't have new information for the team? To me, no. And there are some, like I said, I read a lot of forums, and there are some who say absolutely not. You have to have it. You can't cancel it. I respect that opinion. I just don't share it. I think that if it's not delivering value to the team, there's no point. So, in the end, to kind of summarize things, for me, everything should be looked through a single lens, which is this valuable for the team? If it's not valuable for the team, then there's really no reason to be doing it. Um, can you re-examine it to see how you can make it more valuable? Absolutely. Absolutely you can. And it doesn't mean that if you're just kind of starting out and you're working through these things that there's not going to be road bumps and it might be something that eventually will be valuable. Sure, that's fine. But if you know going into it that you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, if you're doing it because somebody's telling you you have to, or if you're doing it because the Scrum Guide says you have to do it, well, that's not delivering value. That's just checking a box. And there's no value in just checking a box for the sake of checking it. We don't want the team to just check boxes when they're doing their work. And as leaders and practitioners, we need to apply the exact same mindset that we expect the team to. So in the end, it's all about the team. It should always be about the team and not about what's in a textbook or a guide. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.